week's episode of Macabre. Hopefully you little Maccabees had a good week. Every Monday we're going to come for our true crime spooky story podcast, and we're going to switch off each week telling you tales. This week we've got Jumpin' Jimmy Jacob over here.
All right.
I don't know.
Thank you, Crab Cake Carl.
Ooh.
I
I'm
did.
cool with that.
I did crab cakes because my story here takes place in New England in the 1800s.
I love New England.
I think you folks are gonna like this one. I call it the Great New England Vampire Panic. Have you heard of this, Carly?
No.
I'm not talking about Salem's Lot. I'm talking about something real.
No.
Yeah, real. Okay, so let's get into this, huh?
Can't wait.
Old school. You might hear a little paper ruffling. Don't pay that no mind. So, 200 years after the Salem witch trials, farmers became convinced that their relatives were returning from the grave to feed on the living. Children playing near a hillside gravel mine found the first graves. One ran home to tell his mother, who was skeptical at first, until the boy brought a skull to her. And then she was like,
This is real.
Oh, real. This was in Griswold, Connecticut, and this was in 1990. Police initially thought that the burials might be the work of a local serial killer named Michael Ross, which maybe one day we'll do an episode on our boy Michael, but not this case. So they taped off the area as a crime scene. But the brown, decaying bones turned out to be much more than Michael Ross's victims. Could you keep your eyes off of my face?
No.
It makes me... It distracts me.
Well, that's unfortunate.
Yeah. So anyways, these bones were more than a century old. The Connecticut state archaeologist Nick Ballantoni soon determined that the hillside contained a colonial-era farm cemetery. And so New England is full of these, like, unmarked family plots, you know, and the 29 burials were typical of the 1700s and the early 1800s. The dead, many of them children, were laid to rest in thrifty Yankee style. Simple wood coffins, without jewelry or even much clothing, their arms resting by their sides or crossed over their chests. Except for burial number 4. Ballantoni was interested in the grave even before the excavation began. It was one of 2 stone crypts in the cemetery, and it was partially visible from the mine face. So it's made of stone, not like the old-timey wooden ones.
Yeah.
A good old Puritan, you know. Just a good old Schrute Farms kind of.
I was just thinking about the Schrute Farms.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Scraping away the soil with flat-edged shovels and then brushes and bamboo picks, the archaeologist and his team worked through several feet of earth before reaching the top of the crypt. When Ballantoni lifted the first of the large flat rocks that formed the roof, he uncovered the remains of a red-painted coffin and a pair of skeletal feet.
Only feet?
Shh. They lay, as he remembers, quote, in perfect anatomical position. But when he raised the next stone, Ballantoni saw that the rest of the individual had been completely rearranged. The skeleton had been beheaded, the skull and thigh bones rested atop the ribs and vertebrae. It looked like a skull and crossbones motif, a Jolly Roger. I'd never seen anything like it, Ballantoni says. Subsequent analysis shows that the beheading, along with other injuries, including rib fractures, occurred roughly 5 years after death. Somebody also had smashed the coffin. The other skeletons in the gravel hillside were packaged for reburial, but not JB, as the 50-ish male skeleton from the 1830s would come to be called, because of the initials spelt out on the brass tacks of the coffin lid. So they named him JB. He was shipped to the National Museum of Health and Medicine in Washington, D.C. for further study. Meanwhile, Bellantoni started networking. He invited archaeologists and historians to tour the excavation, soliciting theories. Simple vandalism seemed unlikely, as did robbery, because of the lack of the valuables that were at the site. Finally, one colleague asked, "Have you ever heard of the Jewett City vampires?" Have you?
No.
Me neither, until I learned of this. So in 1854, in the neighboring city, Jewett City, Connecticut, townspeople... Ooh, excuse me.
You're not excused.
Just a little belch there. Sorry. Townspeople had exhumed several corpses suspected to be vampires that were rising from their graves to kill the living. A few newspaper accounts of these events survived. So this was in the papers. You know what I'm saying? Extra. Read all about it. The dead are rising.
Paper for a nickel.
Yeah. Had the Griswold grave been desecrated for the same reason? In the course of his far-flung research, Bellantoni placed a serendipitous phone call to Michael Bell, a Rhode Island folklorist who had devoted much of the previous decade to studying New England vampire exhumations. The Griswold case occurred at roughly the same time as the other incidents Bell had investigated. And the setting was right. Griswold was rural, agrarian, and bordering southern Rhode Island, where multiple exhumations had occurred. Many of the other vampires, like J.B., had been disinterred, grotesquely tampered with, and reburied. Rebuilt. We can build him stronger. In light of the tales Bell told of the violated corpses, even the posthumous rib fractures began to make sense. J.B.'s accusers had likely rummaged around in his chest cavity, hoping to remove and perhaps burn his heart.
Perhaps. So they're speculating.
Mm-hmm. As much as you can, I guess, from the evidence.
Yeah.
Headquartered in a charming old schoolhouse, the Middletown Historical Society typically promotes such fortifying topics as Rhode Island grist mill restoration and Stonewall Appreciation Day. 2 nights before Halloween, though, the atmosphere is full of dry ice vapors and high silliness. Fake cobwebs. It's just a little cute.
Little sillies.
A little cuteness. Sorry. Oh, fake cobwebs cover the exhibits. Warty gourds crowd the shelves, and a skeleton with keen red eyes cackles in the corner. "We'll turn him off when you start talking," the Society's president assures Michael Bell, who is readying his slideshow. Bell smiles. Although he lectures across the country and is taught at colleges, including Brown University, he is used to people having fun with his scholarship. And this is a quote, "Vampires have gone from a source of fear to a source of entertainment," he said. Maybe I shouldn't trivialize entertainment, but to me it's not anywhere as interesting as what really happened. Bell's daughter, 37-year-old Jillian, a member of the audience that night, had made futile attempts to tempt her father with the Twilight series. But, and here's a quote, "There's Buffy and Twilight, and then there's what my dad does," she said. "I try to get him interested in the pop culture stuff, but he wants to keep his mind pure." Indeed, Bell seems only mildly aware that the vampire, appearing everywhere from True Blood to the Vampire Diaries, has once again sunk its fangs into the cultural jugular. As far as he's concerned, the undead are always with us.
It's really good writing.
I know.
Runs in our family.
Yeah. Bell wears his hair in a sleek silver bob and has a strong profile. But his extremely lean physique is evidence of a long-distance running habit, not some otherworldly hunger.
Don't touch me.
He favors black sweaters and leather jackets. An ensemble he can easily accentuate with dark sunglasses to fit in with the goth crowd, if research requires it. A consulting folklorist at the Rhode Island Historical Preservation and Heritage Commission for most of his career. Bell has been investigating local vampires for 30 years now, long enough to watch lettering on fragile slate gravestones fade before his eyes and prosperous subdivisions beside once lonely graveyards. He has documented about 80 exhumations reaching as far back as the late 1700s and as far west as Minnesota. But most are concentrated in backwoods New England. In the 1800s, startlingly later than the obvious local analog, the Salem, Massachusetts witch hunts of the 1690s. Hundreds of more cases await discovery, he believes. You read an article, this is a quote, you read an article that describes an exhumation, and they'll describe a similar thing that happened in a nearby town, says Bell, whose book, Food for the Dead, On the Trail of New England's Vampires, is seen as the last word on the subject. Though he has lately found so many new cases that there is a second book on the way. The ones that get recorded, and I actually find them, are just the tip of the iceberg. That's a quote. Why you keep looking at me, dog?
You're telling a story.
Okay.
It just feels like, I don't know, I'm just looking at you, and I've yawned like 7 times to our viewers. And I even tried to hide a yawn with my cup, and it was obvious.
Am I boring you?
No, it's just a really cozy room.
It is, and it's
really easy to yawn a lot in here.
Warm.
Super warm in here. And we can't turn the fan on.
No.
That one was longer because you were watching.
Yeah. All right. Almost 2 decades after JB's grave was discovered. This was in 1990. So.
Still New England?
Yeah. It remains the only intact archaeological clue to the fear that swept the region. Most of the graves are lost to time, and even in the cases where they aren't, unnecessary exhumations are frowned on by the locals. Bell mostly hunts for handwritten records in town hall basements, consults tombstones and old cemetery maps. He traces obscure recurring patterns in communications and rituals, as well as the stories that accompany these rituals. He says, I'm interested in how this stuff is learned and carried on and how its meaning changes from group to group and over time. In part because of the events were relatively recent, evidence of historic vampires isn't as scarce as one might imagine. Excuse me. Incredulous city newspaper reporters dished about the horrible superstition on the front pages. A traveling minister describes an exhumation in his daily log on September 3rd, 1810. The, quote, moldy spectacle, as he writes, was a solemn sight. Even Henry David Thoreau mentions an exhumation in his journal on September 29th, 1859. Though scholars today still struggle to explain the vampire panics, a key detail unites them. The public hysteria almost invariably occurs in the midst of savage tuberculosis outbreaks.
Like Satine on Moulin Rouge.
Yeah, TB.
TB.
TB-DB-doo.
It's one of my favorite movies.
Moulin Rouge.
Yeah.
Come with me. Indeed, the medical museum's tests ultimately revealed that JB had suffered from tuberculosis or a lung disease, very much like it. Typically, a rural family contracted the wasting illness, and even though they often received the standard medical diagnosis, the survivors blamed early victims as vampires, responsible for preying upon family members who subsequently fell sick. Often, an exhumation was called for to stop the vampire's predations. The particulars of the vampire exhumations, though, vary widely. In many cases, only family and neighbors participated, but sometimes town fathers voted on the matter, or medical doctors and clergymen gave their blessings or even pitched in. Some communities in Maine and Plymouth, Massachusetts, opted to simply flip the exhumed vampire face down in the grave and leave it at that. In Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Vermont, though, they frequently burned the dead person's heart, sometimes inhaling the smoke as a cure.
That's so weird.
Isn't that weird? Like,
they didn't have any kind of modern medicine, though, to tell them that that's not going to do anything.
This is true.
So,
in Europe, too, exhumation protocol varied with region. Some beheaded suspected vampire corpses, while others bound their feet with thorny vines. Which, that's kind of metal, if you ask me.
Yeah. Pretty metal.
But I guess, wouldn't the thorns go away?
I would think that they would
go, like, degrade?
Yeah.
I don't know. That thought just hit me. Anyways.
They probably would.
Often, these rituals were clandestine, lantern-lit affairs, but particularly in Vermont, they would be quite public and even festive. One vampire's heart was reportedly torched on the Woodstock, Vermont town green in 1830. In Manchester, hundreds of people flocked to a 1793 heart-burning ceremony at a blacksmith's forge.
Can you imagine dying from horrible causes and then people are like, we're
going to double check here.
We're also going to burn your heart.
Yeah, just to be safe. And then we're going to smoke it.
I'm going to put that in my will.
Yeah. I would like my organs burned and for people to breathe in the smoke.
Must prepare my heart like a brisket.
Mm-hmm. I'd like a nice, somewhat spicy rub prepared.
Little S&P.
Salt and pepper. Baste it, barbecue it.
Grill.
Yeah.
Each side, 3 minutes for perfect grill marks.
Yep. Foil it. Butter.
Forget about it.
Yeah. So, anyways, quote here, Timothy Meade officiated at the altar in the sacrifice to the demon vampire who it was believed was still sucking the blood of the then living wife of Captain Burton. This is from an early town history, and it says it was the month of February and good slaying. It was the month of February and good slaying, like Santa Claus's sleigh.
Mm-hmm.
Like these Vermont.
So they took it the wrong way? Oh, just...
He was just commenting that it's good slaying. Good slaying weather in February.
I was thinking of slay.
No.
Like stab a vampire in the heart. I don't know.
That would be a faux pas.
Yeah.
Misunderstood. Oops.
Oopsie.
So Bell attributes the openness of the Vermont exhumations to colonial settlement patterns. Rhode Island has about 260 cemeteries per 100 square miles. That's a lot, I feel like.
When was the first sled built?
Long ago.
Or this right here, right now. Those people were the first sledders.
So that's Rhode Island, okay? 260 cemeteries per 100 square miles. Versus Vermont's mere 20 per 100 square miles. What's up with that? Rhode Island cemeteries were small and scattered among private farms, whereas Vermont's tended to be much larger, often located in the center of town. Makes sense, right?
Sure. Town square.
So that means that in Vermont, it was much harder to keep a vampire hunt quiet, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So, but they would apparently still do it. As satisfying as such mini theories are, Bell is consumed by the larger questions. He wants to understand who the vampires and their accusers were, in death and in life. During his Middletown lecture, he displays a picture of a man with salt and pepper sideburns and weary eyes, an artist's reconstruction of JB's face based on his skull. I start with the assumption that people of past generations were just as intelligent as we are, Bell says. I look for the logic. Why would they do this? Once you label something, quote, just a superstition, you lock off all inquiry into something that could have been reasonable. Reasonable is not always rational. He wrote his doctoral dissertation on African American voodoo practitioners in the South who cast love spells and curses.
You just add more flair every time.
Mm-hmm.
You're like,
I just want to show off. So it's hard to imagine a population more different from the flinty, consumptive New Englanders he studies now. So he went from voodoo to Vermont to vampires. But Bell sees strong parallels in how they tried to manipulate the supernatural. People find themselves in dire situations where there's no recourse through regular channels, he explains. The folk system offers an alternative, a choice. Sometimes superstitions represent the only hope, he says. The only hope. A new hope. Star Wars. The enduring sadness of the vampire stories lie in the fact that the accusers were usually direct kin of the deceased. Parents, spouses, their children.
that's stupid.
Think about what it would have taken to actually exhume the body of a relative, Bell says. The tale he always returns to is in many ways the quintessential American vampire story. One of the last cases in New England, and the first that he investigated as a new PhD coming to Rhode Island in 1981 to direct a folk life survey of Washington County funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities. History knows the 19-year-old, late 19th century vampire as Mercy Brown. Her family, though, called her Lena. Remember this name, Lena Brown. Mercy.
It's a cute name.
Yeah. I think Mercy's kind of a cool name.
Mm-hmm.
I never hear of anybody called Mercy, but
It's pretty cool.
that was our computer. Please forgive Carly. She knows not what she
I didn't
does.
ask for forgiveness. Please don't.
Well, I wouldn't give it to you anyways. So, Mercy Lena Brown lived in Exeter, Rhode Island, or deserted Exeter, as it was dubbed, or simply one of the border towns. It was largely a subsistence farming community with barely fertile soil. Rocks, rocks, and more rocks, says Sheila Reynolds Boothroyd. Isn't that a great name?
Yeah.
President of the Exeter Historical Association. Farmers heaped stones into tumble-down walls, and rows of corn swerved around the biggest boulders. So it was like not we're Midwest here. We got easy farming.
Mm-hmm.
This sounds like tough. So in the late 19th century, Exeter, like much of the agrarian New England towns, was even more sparsely populated than usual. Civil War casualties had taken their toll on the community, and the new railroads and the promise of richer land to the west lured young men away. By 1892, the year Lena died, Exeter's population had dipped to just 961 people, or souls,
They think that
as a
Lena
pilot
did
would
it.
say. They what?
Do they think Lena dwindled down the population?
I don't think so. I think the things that I said, the Civil War, the Gold Rush.
She's a vampire, though.
I believe she's among us still. I want to believe.
In the form of one of my children.
Yeah. Uh, but in 1820, so this like 70 years earlier, they had about 2,500 people living in Exeter. So in the 70 years, their population dropped to less than 1,000. Farms were abandoned, many of them later to be seized and burned by the government. Uh, Reynolds Boothroyd says that some sections looked like a ghost town. And tuberculosis was harrying the remaining families. Consumption, as it was called, had started to plague New England in the 1730s, a few decades before the first known vampire scares. By the 1800s, when the scares were at their height, the disease was the leading cause of mortality throughout the Northeast, responsible for almost a quarter of all deaths. It was a terrible end, often drawn out over years, with a skyrocketing fever, a hacking, bloody cough, and a visible wasting away of the body. What happened? How did you change?
What are you talking about? I was wearing this the whole time.
Vampire.
Actually, I almost had a heat stroke, and so I had...
Yeah, she had to go change.
Yeah, it was really hot.
It's stuffy in here. Were you guys tricked? Were you like, what? What happened?
Do you think I was a vampire? Because I am.
Let's do a poll. Who here thinks Carly's a vampire?
Every Twilight book right down there.
Yeah.
It's behind you.
Mm-hmm.
All
Down
right.
near the ground.
Let's go.
Yeah, so we were talking about consumption. And by the 1800s, the scares were at their height. The disease was the leading cause of mortality throughout the Northeast, responsible for almost a quarter of all deaths. It was a terrible end, often drawn out over years. Just a skyrocketing fever, a hacking, bloody cough, and a visible wasting away of the body. The emaciated figures strikes one with terror, reads one 18th century description. The forehead covers with drops of sweat, the cheeks painted with a livid crimson, the eyes sunk in, the breath offensive. You know about that.
I would not.
Quick and laborious, and the cough so incessant as to scarcely allow the wretched sufferer time to tell of his complaints. Indeed, Bell says symptoms progressed in such a way that it seemed like something was draining the life and blood out of somebody.
Through the jugular?
Yeah, there was always 2 puncture marks. No. People dreaded the disease without understanding it, and though Robert Cook had identified...
Sorry, and that was just all the symptoms of tuberculosis?
Yeah. Which I actually didn't know before this, how much tuberculosis was like vampirism. It makes sense.
Yeah, and they didn't know any better, so all they had time to do was speculate.
Yeah, simple folks. Anyways. Simpler times.
Simpler.
So Robert Cook had identified the tuberculosis bacteria in 1882, but news of the discovery did not penetrate rural areas for some time. And even if it had, drug treatments wouldn't become available until the 1940s. The year that Lena died, one physician blamed tuberculosis on drunkenness and want among the poor. That sounds like some old-timey crazy stuff. 19th century cures often included drinking brown sugar dissolved in water and frequent horseback riding. Just a spoonful of sugar, you know.
And a little trot on Winnie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, doesn't that seem insane?
Like they just made shit up.
Yeah.
That's like in the Salem witch trials, you had to bake a cake using urine, and if a dog ate it, then you're a witch or something. And it's like, that sounds like witchcraft, using urine for stuff. Anyway,
that's
just
bananas.
Crazy times. It's truly bananas.
Yeah. Okay. If they were being honest, Bell says, the medical establishment would have said, there's nothing we can do. It's in the hands of God. The Brown family, Lena's family, living on the eastern edge of town, probably on a modest homestead of 30 or 40 stony acres, began to succumb to the disease in 1882, December. Lena's mother, Mary Eliza, was the first. Lena's sister, Mary Olive, a 20-year-old dressmaker, died the next year. A tender obituary from a local newspaper hints at what she endured. Quote, "The last few hours she lived was of great suffering, yet her faith was firm and she was ready for the change. The whole town turned out for her funeral and sang one sweetly solemn thought, a hymn that Mary Olive herself had selected." That's nice.
I like the last name Olive.
Yeah. Well, it was like Mary Olive Brown.
Oh.
So it's
I just like Olive is really cute.
Yeah, I like it. Within a few years, Lena's brother Edwin, a store clerk whom the one newspaper columnist described as a big, husky young man, sickened too and left for Colorado Springs, hoping that the climate would improve his health.
Altitude sickness is the first thing that I thought of when you said that.
Yeah.
Because I've had that before, and that sucks.
And that's so far away.
That's such a random spot. Wait,
Yeah.
aren't they in Vermont?
Yeah. It's like
You're just switching one mountainous
cold place.
cold place to another.
I don't know. To me,
Did he ride horseback to get there?
maybe he just thought the horse ride would
Him
get him.
and the horse are drinking brown sugar water.
Mm-hmm. Singing Mary Poppins.
He's got a parasol.
Yeah.
He's twirling while he's
Yeah, maybe.
just sipping his brown sugar water, and he's like, "This is what will cure me."
This'll help. So Lena, who was just a child when her mother and sister died, didn't fall ill until nearly a decade after they were buried. Her tuberculosis was the galloping kind, which meant that she might have been infected but remained asymptomatic for years, only to fade fast after showing the first signs of the disease. A doctor attended her in her last illness, a newspaper said, and informed her father that further medical aid was useless. Her January 1892 obituary was much terser than her sister's. Quote, "Miss Lena Brown, who has been suffering from consumption, died Sunday morning." Pretty cut and dry. That was, I guess, like the alternate
That's
obituary
how I would write
writer.
yours.
Yeah.
Jake's gone.
Where'd he go?
Gone. That's too much information. I'm not paying for those words to be added.
A husky man. Jake is dead.
A husky man, dead.
Mm-hmm. And that's all. I mean, I'll be dead. I'll be in the great beyond, so.
Yeah, so what do you care?
Sorry, I don't give a crap.
Yeah.
Say what you want. I'm flying in the interdimensional wavelengths of the universe, you know what I'm saying?
Interstellar, you gonna be out.
Mm-hmm. Boop. Sweet. As Lena was on her deathbed, her brother was, after a brief remission, taking a turn for the worse. Edwin had returned to Exeter from the Colorado resorts in a dying condition, according to one account. If the good wishes and prayers of his many friends could be realized, friend Eddie would speedily be restored to perfect health, another newspaper wrote. But some neighbors, likely fearful for their own health, were not content with prayers. Several approached George Brown, the children's father, and offered an alternative take on the recent tragedies. Perhaps an unseen diabolical force was preying on his family. It could be that one of the three Brown women wasn't dead after all, instead secretly feasting on the living tissue and blood of Edwin.
That's it.
There it is.
That's the one.
Yep.
She did it.
That's what the Providence Journal later summarized. So, if the offending corpse, the journal uses the term vampire in some stories, but the locals seemed not to, was discovered and destroyed, then Edwin would recover. The neighbors asked to exhume the bodies in order to check for fresh blood in their hearts. So they're seeing, they're like evidence of fresh blood.
Mm-hmm.
George Brown, of course, gave permission. You're like, yeah.
Yeah.
The three lights of my life, my wife and 2 daughters, go ahead, dig them up. Check their hearts.
He knows something.
Well, I guess if he really thought that it would save his son, I don't know. Whatever. These olden times were weird.
Desperate times, yeah.
On the morning of March 17th, 1892, a party of men dug up the bodies as the family doctor and journal correspondent looked on. George was absent for unstated but understandable reasons. After nearly a decade, Lena's sister and mother were barely more than bones. Lena, though, had been dead only a few months, and it was wintertime, so she was cold. The body was in a fairly well-preserved state, the correspondent later wrote. The heart and liver were removed, and in cutting open the heart, clotted and decomposed blood was found. Duh, I feel like.
It's a cold body. I don't know what's confusing them about that, but.
And then during this impromptu autopsy, the doctor again emphasized that Lena's lungs showed diffuse tuberculosis germs. Whatever that means. Undeterred, the villagers burned her heart and liver on a nearby rock, of which there were tons, feeding Edwin the ashes. He died less than 2 months later.
Because they fed him tuberculosis.
Yeah. Well, and he already had it.
I mean...
Where's House MD when you need him?
Yeah. You know that show's based off Sherlock Holmes.
I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So anyways, so-called vampires do escape the grave in at least one real sense, through stories. Lena Brown's surviving relatives saved local newspaper clippings and family scrapbooks, alongside carefully copied recipes. They discussed the events on Decoration Day, when Exeter residents adorned the town's cemeteries. But the tale traveled much further than they knew. Even at the time, New England's vampire panic struck onlookers as a baffling anachronism. In the late 1800s were a period of social progress and scientific flowering. Indeed, many of the Rhode Island exhumations occurred within 20 miles of Newport, a high society's summer nucleus, where the scions of the Industrial Revolution vacationed. Did I say that right? Industrial Revolution vacationed. Yeah. All right.
Big words. First time.
Blah.
Blap.
Blah. All right. At first, only people who'd lived in or had visited the vampire-ridden communities knew about the scandal. Quote, "We seem to have been transported back to the darkest age of unreasoning ignorance and blind superstition, instead of living in the 19th century. And in a state calling itself enlightened and Christian," one writer at a small-town Connecticut paper opined on the wake of an 1854 exhumation. But Lena Brown's exhumation made news. Why are you looking at me like that?
I knew you were going to throw the paper. Don't. You break it. It's broken.
It's
broken.
It's already paid off.
Yeah.
But Lena Brown's exhumation made news. First, a reporter from the Providence Journal witnessed her unearthing. Then, a well-known anthropologist named George Stetson traveled to Rhode Island to probe the barbaric superstition in the surrounding area. Published in the Venerable American Anthropologist Journal, Stetson's account of New England's vampires made waves throughout the world. Before long, even members of the foreign press were offering various explanations for the phenomenon. Perhaps the neurotic modern novel was driving the New England madness. Or maybe shrewd local farmers had simply been pulling Stetson's leg. A writer for the London Post declared that whatever forces drove the, quote, Yankee vampire, It was an American problem, and most certainly not the product of a British folk tradition, even though many families in the area could trace their lineage directly back to England.
And vampires.
Mm. And I know that, that's how vampires got over here. In boats.
Had to come from somewhere.
Namely Dracula on the ship, the Demeter.
Yeah.
I know stuff.
Sometimes.
I know stuff. Yeah. In the Boston Daily Globe, a writer went so far as to suggest that perhaps the frequent intermarriage of families in these backcountry districts may partially account for some of their characteristics. Inbreeding, I guess. One 1896 New York World clipping even found its way into the papers of a London stage manager and aspiring novelist, Bram Stoker, whose theater company was touring the United States that same year. His Gothic masterpiece, Dracula, was published in 1897. Some scholars have said that there wasn't enough time for the news accounts to have influenced the Dracula manuscript. Yet others see Lena in the character of Lucy, her very name a tempting amalgam of Lena and Mercy. Get it? Like Lena, Mercy, Lucy. Kind of a...
Fun fact, my mom almost named me Lucy. And then it was our grandma's dog's name instead.
Yeah. Instead we named a hound.
It was a good dog.
Yeah. A consumptive-seeming teenage girl turned vampire. That's Lucy. Who is exhumed in one of the novel's most memorable scenes. Fascinatingly, a medical doctor presides over Lucy's disinterment, just as one oversaw at Lena's. Could they be linked? We don't know. Whether or not Lucy's roots are in Rhode Island, Lena's historic exhumation is referenced in H.P. Lovecraft's The Shunned House, a short story about a man being haunted by dead relatives that includes a character named Mercy. Any Lovecraft fans out there? Me. I even got Lovecraft on my arm. Not the word Lovecraft.
Book but up there that was Lovecraft.
Yeah, you do. I gave it to you.
Yeah. It's the bottom one, isn't it?
It's the very bottom one. Can't see it.
Dang.
Yep. What a great brother I am.
Sometimes.
Giving you gifts of books.
I wish you could see them.
Yeah.
Because they're very cool.
They're pretty sweet. They're
cool.
special edition stuff.
Yeah.
We're kind of tight like that. And
I'm ready when you are.
Through fiction and fact, Lena's narrative continues today.
That poor girl.
Yeah.
Her only crime was getting sick around a bunch of idiots.
Yeah. Which, I mean, we could all say we've done that. Part of Bell's research involves going along on legend trips, the modern graveside pilgrimages made by those who believe or want to believe that the undead stalk Rhode Island. On legend trips, Bell is largely an academic presence. He can even be a bit of a killjoy, declaring that the main reason that no grass grows on a vampire's grave is that vampire graves have so many visitors who crush all the vegetation.
Yeah.
It's just because people are always there.
So my first thought was, oh yeah, tuberculosis kills grass. But that makes way more sense.
Yeah. So 2 days before Halloween... Why?
I don't know.
This is what she's messing with here, folks.
I just like it. I just thought it was cool. My intrusive thoughts were like, flip it.
Yeah. Yeah. So 2 days before Halloween, Bell went through the forests of swamp maple and swamp oak to Exeter. For almost a century after Lena died, the town, still sparsely settled, excuse me, burp, pasta. It remained remarkably unchanged. The electric lights weren't installed in the western part of Exeter until the 1940s, and the town had two pound keepers. charged with the safekeeping stray cattle and pigs, and until 1957. In the 1970s, when I-95 was built, Exeter evolved into an affluent bedroom community of Providence. But visitors still occasionally turn a corner to discover the past, a dirt road cluttered with wild turkeys or deer hopping over stone fences. Honestly, it sounds kind of nice.
I know.
We should go visit Exeter.
I have a friend in Vermont. He actually listens to our show.
Oh, shout out, Vermont friend.
What's up, Andy?
Andy. Anyways, but visitors still occasionally turn a corner to discover the past. Oops, I went back a little bit. We were saying that sounds nice. Yeah. Some elderly locals square dance in barns on the weekends, and streets kept their old names, like Sodom Trail, Noose Neck Hill.
Okay.
The white wooden Chestnut Hill Baptist Church in front of Lena's Cemetery was built in 1838 and has its original blown glass windows.
Oh, that's probably beautiful.
I feel like you could shatter.
Like
just one little flick.
That sugar candy that makes like stained glass.
It's like I was trying to open my basement windows. Did I tell you this? And
no, but they're brittle.
They're brittle. And like
they're old. That house is from the 1800s.
That house is from the 1800s, and I was trying to push it from the outside with my foot near the ground, and I just went, just broke a little panel, like as easy as anything. It was so brittle. That's what I imagine.
That's great.
Yeah. So if you're any rodents or raccoons out there, you can get in my basement right now.
It's a free-for-all.
Yeah. Free for all. There are traps.
And they keep food in the basement. They've got a pantry down there.
Yeah.
So.
But we put traps down there. Human traps.
Oh.
So as Belle was checking all this out, a nor'easter storm, which, have you ever heard of the term a nor'easter? It's like northeaster. It's like a real Yankee New England term for just
I've heard that.
Those crazy storms that they get.
Mm-hmm.
The heavy rain will soon turn to snow, but there's a bullying wind. His umbrella blooms inside out like black flowers. Though it's a somber place, there's no immediate clue that an accused vampire was buried there. Except, perhaps, for an unfortunately timed Red Cross blood drive sign in the front of the farmer's garage next door.
Oh, shut up.
Isn't that funny?
Yeah, that's funny.
Unlike Salem, Exeter doesn't promote its dark claim to fame and remains in some respects an insular community. Old-timers don't like the hooded figures who turn up this time of year, or the cars idling with their lights off. They say the legend should be left alone, perhaps with good reason. Maybe the legend's true.
Yep.
No, last summer a couple of teenagers were killed on a pilgrimage to Lena's grave when they lost control of their car on Purgatory Road.
Seems eerie.
Man, I love all the names of everything.
Those names are really cool,
yeah.
Actually.
Most vampire graves stand apart in wooded spots outside the modern cemetery fences, where snow where snow melts slower and there's a thick understory of ferns. But the Chestnut Hill Cemetery is still in use, and here is Lena. She lies beside the brother who ate her heart and the father who let it happen.
Eat your heart out.
Yeah. Eat your heart out.
Isn't that a slang?
Yeah.
Who says that? Eat your heart out.
It's something.
I feel like they do this too when they say it.
Eat your heart out.
Eat your heart out.
Jaeger bombs. Jaeger bombs.
What?
Jaeger bombs.
On the Jersey Shore with that?
You remember that old video?
Yeah.
You ever had a Jaeger bomb?
Yep. Back when I used to drink.
Yeah. I find them delicious, unfortunately.
Yeah. I don't like the licoricey Irish car bombs.
Let's not talk about you anymore.
It's just...
I said enough.
Don't they have Jaeger in them?
I don't know.
Oh no, it's Bailey's and Jameson dropped in a Guinness.
Oh, yeah. Is that what that is?
I think so. I don't know. Forget about it.
So her brother ate her heart, and her dad let it happen.
Yum.
And now she gets to rest next to them. Other markers are freckled with lichen, but not hers. The stone looks to have been recently cleaned. It has been stolen over the years, and now an iron strap anchors it to the earth. People have scratched their names into the granite. They leave offerings like plastic vampire teeth, cough drops. I think that's hilarious.
That's
A little cruel, maybe. Like, here, this will help with your cough.
Does nobody care that it was a real person?
A real person is dead. Like,
at the end of this episode, I'll tell you guys a little excerpt about another gravestone that's really interesting. Go ahead, though.
Okay. Once there was a note on the grave that said, "You go, girl." Belle says.
To what?
That happened. I don't know. Like, maybe she was a vampire. You know?
Mm-hmm.
Today, there's a bunch of trampled daisies, and dangling from the headstone's iron collar, a butterfly charm on a chain.
Ooh.
Now,
Nice.
You might be asking yourself, how did 19th century Yankees, remembered as some of the most pious and practical of peoples, come to believe in vampires? Especially when the last known vampire panics at the time hadn't occurred since 18th century Europe. Some modern scholars have linked the legend to vampiric symptoms of diseases like rabies and porphyria. It's a porphyria.
Yeah.
Porphyria. Which is a rare genetic disorder that can cause extreme sensitivity to sunlight and turn teeth reddish brown.
Isn't that what that guy off of Powder had? Oh, he had magic powers, didn't he?
Yeah, I think he could control lightning. I don't know.
I think he could.
I think I was like 9 when I saw that movie, so.
Yeah, it's been a soft decade since I've seen that.
It's been like a hard 2 decades.
I was just going to say it might have been a soft
double decade.
2 decade.
An upper decker.
Yeah.
Anyways, so Exeter residents at the time claimed that the exhumations were a tradition of the Indians. Whatever.
Okay.
Blame it on them. Typical.
It's rude.
Colonizers, right? The legend originated in Slavic Europe, where the word vampire first appeared in the 10th century. Bell believes that the Slavic and Germanic immigrants brought the vampire superstitions with them in the 1700s, perhaps when Palatine Germans colonized Pennsylvanians. Or Hessian mercenaries served in the Revolutionary War.
Oh, the Hessians.
Yeah. My sense is that it came more than one time through more than one source, he says. The first known reference to the American vampire scare is a scolding letter to the editor of the Connecticut Current and Weekly Intelligencer published in June 1784. Councilman Moses Holmes from the town of Willington, warned people to beware of a certain quack doctor, a foreigner, who had urged families to dig up and burn dead relatives to stop consumption. Holmes had witnessed several children disinterred at the doctor's request and wanted no more of it, and that the bodies of the dead may rest quiet in their graves without such interruption. I think the public ought to be aware of being led away by such an imposture. But some modern scholars have argued that the vampire superstition made a certain degree of practical sense. In Vampires, Burials, and Death, folklorist Paul Barber dissects the logic behind vampire myths, which he believes originally arose from unschooled but astute observations of decay. Bloated dead bodies appear as if they have been recently eaten. A staked corpse screams due to the escape of natural gases, etc. Etc. etc., etc. That was a Willy Wonka thing. I don't know.
Oh, I was doing etc. like from Glass and
Unbreakable.
Unbreakable. And what's the one?
Split.
Split.
I love those movies, but I don't know what you're talking about.
When he's the little kid.
Oh, etc.
Etc.
Yeah. He's got a little lisp.
Yeah, that one.
Etc.
Yeah.
Okay. I
Now
hear
you see
you.
what I'm doing.
I hear. Okay. The seemingly bizarre vampire beliefs, Barber argues, get at the essence of contagion, the insight that illness begets illness and death begets death. Damn it.
Geth.
I hate Geth. Geth who? Another lisp. Anyways. Vampire believers say that death comes to us from invisible agents, Barber says. We say that death comes to us from invisible agents as well. The difference is that we can get out a microscope and look at the germs, at the agents.
Okay, so.
You can. While New England farmers may have been guided by something like reason, the spiritual climate of the day. What?
Something like reason.
Something like it.
Yeah. Not reason, but something like it.
Yeah. The spiritual climate of the day was also hospitable to vampire rumors. Contrary to their puritanical reputation, rural New Englanders in the 1800s were a fairly heathen lot, which I've been called a heathen before.
Not me.
Oops. You are a heathen. Let's see, I lost my... Only about 10% belonged to a church. Rhode Island, originally founded as a founded as a haven for religious dissenters, was particularly lax. Christian missionaries were at various points dispatched there from more godly communities. The missionaries came back and lament that there is no Bible in the home. No church going whatsoever, says Linford Fisher, a Brown University colonial historian. You have people out there essentially in cultural isolation. Mary Olive, Lena's sister, joined a church just 2 weeks before she died, her obituary said. I wonder if that's why she had a nicer obituary. Because she was church going.
Oh, I believe that 100%.
Yeah. In place of organized worship, superstition reigned. Magical springs with healing powers, dead bodies that bled in the presence of their murderers, people buried shoes by fireplaces to catch the devil if he tried to come down the chimney.
Clever.
Yeah.
A lot of these are, like,
That's
lot
solid.
Of stuff you hear about this time period is, like, really clever, but...
Pretty practical.
It's not realistic. It's very... It's ironic that these fixes that they do are, like, witchy.
Yeah.
Like, it sounds like a ritual that you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
But you're a Christian.
Like, I would say that was more heathen.
Yeah, that's... Like, sprinkle this and do this and...
Yeah.
You'll get rid of the devil that comes through your door. It's like that... What you just explained was a ritual.
Yeah.
Irony.
Oh, well. I'm not a theologian. So... we've done this next one. They nailed horseshoes above the doors to ward off evil, and carved daisy wheels, a kind of colonial hex sign, into the door frames. We had a horseshoe. I just thought I was lucky.
We did.
I just thought it was a good luck thing.
Yeah.
Not real though.
Well,
like we weren't like believing.
You know what another one is that is super common? Is the spoon and fork. The large wooden spoon and fork that people put over a doorway.
I don't recall that.
I'm just now realizing I might have watched that on Stan Against Evil or Stan versus Evil. Have you ever watched that?
No.
Oh, you have to.
No. All right, be quiet. If superstition likely fanned the vampire panics, perhaps the most powerful forces at play were communal and social. By 1893, there were just 17 people per square mile in Exeter. It's a pretty low population density.
Yeah.
A fifth of the farms were fully abandoned, the fields turning slowly back into forest. In her monograph, The New England Vampire Belief, Image of the Decline, Gothic literature scholar Fay Ringle Hazel hints at the vampire metaphor behind the westward hemorrhage.
That's an awesome name.
What? Fay Ringle Hazel?
Fay Ringle Hazel.
Yeah. Have you noticed I've said both of your daughters' names in this?
I did.
Haven and Hazel.
Mm-hmm.
The migration seemed to drain rural New England of its most enterprising young citizens, leaving the old and unfit behind. As Exeter teetered near collapse, maintaining social ties must have taken on new importance. An exhumation represented, first and foremost, a duty to one's own kin. Dead or dying, the ritual would alleviate the guilt someone might feel for not doing everything that they could do to save a family, to leave no stone unturned, Bell says. Even more significant, in small communities where disease could spread quickly, an exhumation was an outward display that you were doing everything you can to fix the problem. Residents of the already beleaguered town were likely terrified. They knew that if consumption wiped out the Brown family, it could take out the next family.
And hopefully it did. Those jerkwads that
Yeah,
just
the
left
dingles.
the old people.
Yeah.
I would do that too. No,
Uh,
I wouldn't.
Yeah. Well, it depends on the person.
Yeah, not family.
Maybe. Oh,
I wouldn't leave family.
not family?
I would not leave family.
Not even like a younger sister?
I don't have one. Well, I do.
Our little brother Austin.
No,
It's kind of a.
Sandra.
Oh, oh yeah. I was
so
gonna
funny.
say, don't be rude, Austin's.
Oh, that's funny that that's what you thought of first.
Yeah, no, we have a. I would never abandon her.
No. Austin would have to fight for his right to stay.
Yeah. Oh, guys, you guys must think we're awful. None of this is real, or is it? Mm-hmm.
Wait till we have Austin
Yeah.
be a guest on here.
Yeah, we'll have to. You guys will like that. Our other
We're
brother
gonna do
Austin.
some guest episodes with extra people, and Austin's gonna be a good episode.
Yeah. He's too skinny though. I believe I'll whoop his ass in a fight.
Oh, whoop his ass. He
Too
was standing
skinny.
right here. You couldn't even see him if he was standing sideways.
Yeah. I believe I'll whoop his ass in a fight. Anyways.
Okay.
And you can tell him I said that.
You can take that to the bank.
Yeah, take that to the bank and cash it.
I have. I have beat him up before.
So anyways, George Brown was being entreated by the community, Bell says. He had to make a gesture. The strongest testament to the power of the vampire myth is that George Brown did not, in fact, believe in it, according to the Providence Journal. It was he who also asked a doctor to perform an autopsy at the graveyard, and he who elected to be elsewhere during the ritual. He authorized his loved one's exhumation. The journal says simply, to satisfy the neighbors, who were, according to another newspaper account, worrying the life out of him. Just nagging him. So he was like, you know what? Just do it. A description with its own vampiric overtones.
Ooh.
The life out of him. Get it?
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps it was wise to let them have their say, since George Brown, apparently not prone to tuberculosis, had to coexist with his neighbors well into the next century. He died in 1922. Probably just sad.
The roaring 20s.
Yeah. I feel like he
Fatal.
probably had a Great Depression of his own before the Great Depression.
Yeah.
But relatives of the Browns still live in Exeter and are laid to rest on Chestnut Hill. Some, planning ahead, have erected their grave markers. It can be disconcerting to drive past someone's tombstone on the way to his or her home for a vampire-oriented interview, one person has said. On a sunny Halloween morning, When Bell was left for the vampire folklore conference at the University of London. Hey, hang on, let me. Oh, let me just re-say that.
Sorry, he's a vampire. Stitch. So it actually matches the story without even trying.
Yeah. Sometimes the descendants of the Brown family, the Browns, I suppose, will bring to the graveyard a quilt that Lena herself sewed.
Oh, I love quilts.
That's
awesome.
The cotton bedspread is pink, blue, and cream, and what look from a distance like large patches of plain brown fabric are really fields of tiny daisies. It's the work of a farm girl without any wasteful applique. Lena clearly ran out of material in places and had to scrimp for more.
Scrimp.
Textile scholars at the University of Rhode Island have traced her snippets of florals, plaid, and paisley to the 1870s and 1880s, when Lena was still a child.
Wow.
Dutiful child. They wondered if she used her sister's and mother's old dresses for the project.
Probably.
Perhaps her mother's death, too, explains Lena's quilting abilities, which are considerable for a teenager. She might have had to learn household skills before other girls because of the lack of a mama.
Yep.
The quilt is in immaculate condition and was likely being saved for something. Lena's hope chest, maybe. You remember what those are?
Yep.
Yep. That's the theory of one of her direct descendants named Dorothy O'Neill, who is one of the quilt's custodians and is knowledgeably a quilter herself, a knowledgeable quilter.
I want to be a quilter real bad.
Yeah.
We have some pretty phenomenal quilters in our family.
True. Me.
Me.
Yes. I think the quilt is exquisite, especially in light of what she went through in her life, O'Neill says. She ended up leaving behind something beautiful. She didn't know she'd have to leave it, but she did.
I love that for you, that you're having a good time.
But Lena hasn't left entirely. She is said to frequent a certain bridge, manifested as the smell of roses. She appears in children's books and paranormal television specials. She murmurs in the cemetery, say those who leave tape recorders there. Says those. Sometimes
Say
I'm good at
those.
reading. Say those. People have left tape recorders there, and supposedly you can hear her voice sometimes. She is rumored to visit the terminally ill and to tell them that dying isn't so bad.
It ain't so bad, you see?
The quilt pattern that Lena used was very rare in Rhode Island and is sometimes called the Wandering Foot, and it carries a superstition of its own. Anybody who slept under it, the legend says, would be lost to her family, doomed to wander.
Do you have a picture of the quilt?
No. I'm sure we could find it, though.
Oh, we should look one up.
Yeah. And I want to give a big shout out to Abigail Morris from the Smithsonian magazine. She really is the one that did all of the digging for that.
The down dirty digging.
Yeah. I just said it here. But, yeah, thank you, folks. So what do you think? What do you think of
Yeah. Thanks for
Lena.
being our loyal
Maccabees?
followers, our little Maccabees.
Check out our Patreon for cool stuff.
Merch.
We got merch coming
merch.
soon.
Well, by the
We're
time
really
you
good
watch
at that.
this, it'll be there.
Yeah, by the time you see it,
Hats,
we'll
shirts,
already be in your house.
cups, stickers.
Yeah.
We'll be lingering in your kitchen.
These things.
Mug. Yeah, this is just really cool. I don't know. You didn't play with one of these as a kid? You're lying.
You remember those little twister things?
Yeah. Oh,
I had the real fear when I was a child. I can safely say a phobia of tornadoes.
We live where tornadoes actually happen, so that's...
And I had one of those spinny tornado things, and I remember being like, don't do that, because it's like the kid tornado and the mom tornado will come looking for it. I remember that. I had that real fear. I was 19 years old. No, I'm just kidding.
Do you remember the cups that you could press the button and it'd spin your drink?
Oh,
and
yeah.
it'd make the tornado.
Little chocolate milk action.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are pretty cool.
So I said I was going to mention on my series that I do with my stories that I tell you guys, I'm going to do my besties and true crime around the globe, or whatever I called it. Most of my in-laws and my family lives in Oklahoma, and there's a tombstone right near where my niece lives, and on the tombstone from like the 18 or early 1900s, it says killed by werewolves. Or like wolf men. And the tombstone keeps getting stolen, but I might do a story about that, and that one is really interesting.
That sounds cool.
Yeah. We've touched on vampires quite a few times, but have we touched on werewolves?
No.
All right. Thank you guys for coming, and we'll see you next Monday.
See ya.
Bye.